Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Justin Perkins. This is Talk Junkie. Today we're going to talk about music. I've done a couple podcasts in the past about music, but it's kind of something just dawned on me. I like to run. I've not done that in a while. I let myself get pretty bad out of shape, and I had to get back to walking. Music's big for me when I'm working out. I kind of like metal, pretty heavy metal. Slayer, Lamb of God, things of that nature. If I'm hitting a heavy bag or if I'm doing anything physical, like real physical activity. When I would run, I would often listen to heavier metal, hard rock, things of that nature, almost all the time, unless when I'm doing a 5K. For whatever reason, when I'm doing a 5K, I do hip-hop. I don't know. I don't really listen to a whole lot of hip-hop. But it's a very selective few groups I listen to, and that's almost always what I go to when I do a 5K, the extent of running a 5K. Sometimes I'll run with it if I'm training for the 5K or something, but most of the time it's metal, and then for whatever reason that. But I also enjoy to walk. A lot of times when I hike, I don't do music. It depends. If the place I'm at is pretty secluded and, I can actually hear nature, then I prefer the nature aspect of that. But if I'm just walking like I am right now, trying to get my body back in shape for running, or if I'm walking in between runs because of, some pain in joints or something like that, or a lot of times, like I'll try to run as many days as I can every week up until a 5K, and then for that week before the 5K, I would prefer to walk maybe the last 3 days before the 5K, walk to 3.5, 4 miles for the day. So it's a variance of things. But a couple days ago, this actually started with a ZZ Top album. I sat down and watched a documentary about ZZ Top. It's a killer documentary. It's on Netflix. And the next time I went to walk, I put on Eliminator from beginning to end in order. The next walk, I put on Big Head Todd and the Monsters' Beautiful World from beginning to end in order. And I didn't time my walk based on mileage or distance or anything like that. I just kind of walked until the album was complete and then walked on home. One time I let the album actually start over. I did it with a harder album. I done it with Deftones' White Pony. I did it with Black Crowes' Shake Your Money Maker. Again, beginning to end in order. And then the last one I did it with was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes. First song to last song in order. And that one just jived perfectly because I had a short amount of time to really get a walk in. I wasn't going to get my full mileage in. I knew that. The album's only 36 minutes and something long. Literally, when I walked almost back to the house, I couldn't have been within 25 feet of the house. Album was over. It was perfect timing. But in doing that, it kind of, and I know I've talked about this, especially on the formats episode. I've done a couple episodes on different musical formats. Listening to an album from beginning to end, there's something about that. Like, a lot of albums are meant to be listened to that way. I really feel most albums before, let's say, 2005 maybe, were designed that way. From heavy metal, from like new metal to Korn's albums, Follow the Leader. It had neat little things that bled from song to song and things. A lot of songs really were made better if you listen to the song before, just that lead in. Obviously, to me, Pink Floyd albums are a prime example of that. I feel like Pink Floyd is enjoyed much better in order, song to song. And with digital music and really the rise of the single and people's ability to only purchase one song digitally, myself included, it seems like a lot of people got away from that experience of the entire album from beginning to end, from first song to last song. I know I got away from it, and it's something I still do. Like, this is not something unusual for me, but I think the setting is what made this special. Used to, when I would listen to an album beginning to end, it would usually be, say, in my bedroom floor, late at night, nothing else going on, zoned out, there I was, beginning to end. And I would do it with numerous albums in a night, maybe 2-3 albums in a night. I may stay up all night doing that. And I kind of went from doing that to now I listen to a lot of music digitally in my car. And I may even sit down and go through an entire band. I may sit down and start with a band and listen to every album they've got until I'm done listening, for however many days it takes for me to drive around and get enough time in my car to listen to it. But it probably won't necessarily be in order of songs on albums. But I've sit down and done that in my truck driving, and it may take 2-3 days to get through an entire album beginning to end if you don't have long drives each day. But a lot of times when I'm out in the little building my son and I use for his video games and my music stuff, I'll just put on a record. And I know, I think it might have been 3-4 days back, last weekend, I sat down and listened to 3 albums straight through while I was cleaning on that building and putting some stuff in storage and just straightening some stuff out. It was pretty nice out, and sun was out, and it was warm in the building. And I sat down and I went through Hotel California by the Eagles all the way through, Led Zeppelin 4 all the way through, and I sat down and went through, now this is the greatest hits, Tom Petty, all the way through. Now, that didn't feel the same as it felt when I sat down and walked and listened to these. And I think the reason why is my mind was preoccupied. It's not like it used to be back when I'd sit in my room and listen to those bands and stuff. My mind was preoccupied. I wasn't thinking about just that music, just that album, just the flow of those songs. So when I was walking and doing it, it had a different feel. So even though I've still been doing that periodically over the years, listening to them, the atmosphere and the situation's not always been right. Sometimes it feels really good to sit down and just focus on the album, just listen to the album and experience it from the first song to the last song. Now, I mentioned something there about it being a greatest hits album, and what makes that kind of, I don't know, less than ideal is those albums don't always flow. And the best example of that is Are You Experienced, the Jimi Hendrix. That album doesn't feel like it flows. It doesn't. It's good. It's a good album from beginning to end. It's one of my favorite albums. It's probably the first CD that I really wore out. Like, it didn't get scratched in my case. I wore it out. I love that album, but it doesn't really have too much of a flow to it. Even though I didn't know that, it's a compilation. I mean, it has to be because those songs are in other places, I would assume. But even if it's not a compilation, it doesn't flow that well to me. Those songs are strong, but they're strong independently. Axis Bold as Love was an album that I felt flowed better. It's a CD that I had, and it's one, now that I mentioned that's something that's popped in my head. I need to go back and listen to from beginning to end and see if that's true. I don't think every album obviously is designed that way, and doesn't have to be. Some albums are. Tool feels that their albums are made that way, and so they were somewhat reluctant they were very reluctant to put it on streaming services. Now it's available. You can get their music on streaming services. But, if what I'm told is true, Garth Brooks is still a musician that feels that way, that it doesn't have the same effect if you just get the single. So he's still not really available in all these places. I think it's good to be able to listen to songs independently. I'm not against the single. You know, I'm cool with it. I'm not against just finding the deep tracks and just listening to the deep tracks occasionally. I think that's just as valuable as anything else. But I think once you experience an album the way the band or the artist wrote it and intended it to be experienced, that's a whole different thing. You know, there's some music, like when I sit down and listen to a Slayer album, I don't know that they had an ideal for flow and things of that nature of how the album was going, because it doesn't. I've listened to them front to back. It doesn't change the experience for me. Heavy metal like that is a different experience than what I will get from something like a Tom Petty album, you know. And I'm looking for something different when I listen to it, and I like them equally, but I don't need that experience necessarily from that. Now, on the other hand, I take a Deftones album, and I do like the flow. I like it'll raise and fall. It's like ocean waves, and it definitely has a groove built into it, and I like that. I like the way that they do that. It won't always be true for every band, and it's not that, like, if you take an album, you know, try to think of something. To me, Eliminator was a good example of this. Eliminator's not an album that has every one of their great songs on it. Eliminator's not an album that you need the songs to bleed one to the other necessarily, but it gives you an experience. It gives you an added layer to that music when you listen to it from beginning to end. So even if an album is very much structured to be listened to and taken apart out song by song, getting in that headspace for that artist and getting in that headspace for that album and listening to that album from beginning to end in order sometimes gives you a better experience, maybe even if it isn't designed to do so. To me, the new Sturgill Simpson album flows very, very well in order and beginning to end, and I like that a lot. If you go back to Sea Stories, you know, obviously that was designed to go from beginning to end, and it is a much better experience on some of those songs if it is beginning to end. And, you know, there's always songs. I got really big into nu metal in the late 90s, and you know, one of my favorite bands, Deftones, come out of that pocket. But you know, a lot of those bands, I'll go back and I'll listen to songs because I still listen to them. Korn, System of a Down, the first Limp Bizkit album. A lot of those bands would bleed their songs one track to the next, and I always listened to them that way. I always listened to them as an experience, one song to the next, you know, because that was still at a time when I had plenty of time to kill, lay around and listen to music, which you have possibly during quarantine time right now, so do so. You know, it's when you hear a song and you know what's supposed to come before it, but it doesn't happen, you know, it does take away from that song a little bit. So if you've never done it, or if it's never, you know, I mean, a lot of people, you know, I've got one friend that listens to this. I know this is like preaching to the choir to her, because I know she understands that flow and how important that is. But if you've never really thought about it, because it's just never, I don't know, for whatever reason, that's just not something you've ever got into, take your favorite album from your favorite band and give it a try. Take a band that's just got one or two songs that you like, but you really like those songs, but you just can't seem to get into a groove of anything else they've got. Do that and see what you glean from it. You know, hindsight's 20/20, and when you're sitting and doing these, a lot of times things will pop up in your head, and you'll go, "Oh wait, you know, I remember this and I remember that." A while back, the friend I'd mentioned earlier, she mentioned an album from Dire Straits. I cannot remember the name of the album. Maybe it's Water's Edge. I can't remember. But that was like her favorite album of theirs. And, you know, it's not the obvious choice for most people. It doesn't have, quote, the hits on it. Not all of them anyway. And it's not the more commercial, like Money for Nothing, But I sit down and listen to that album beginning to end. And in doing that, it strengthened how I felt about all of those songs. Like, I could pull certain, like Wild West World, things like that. I could pull those songs off and go, okay, I've heard those songs, I like those songs, but then here's 2 or 3 songs that I was indifferent about. But when sitting down and experiencing that, she happens to mention this album and how much she likes it and recommends it. So I sit down and go beginning to end. And I had the album digitally already downloaded from beginning to end. I just had never done that. So I sat down and I went beginning to end with the album, and it kind of re-emphasized how much I liked the songs I liked, but it also brought a new point of view on the songs that were, I was indifferent about. And so I think I'm going to do that more with songs and albums, or songs and bands that I really, maybe I'm not went as in depth in as I should. Take a band that I really, really like, maybe 2 or 3 of their songs, and okay, let's deep dive into an album. Let's take this album and go. Somebody that I did that with today before doing this is a guy named Charles Bradley. I've heard songs, Victim of Love, things like that over the years. His version of Black Sabbath's, what is the Black Sabbath song he does? Changes. Is one of my favorite songs of all time. But I sat down and kind of went. I actually watched a live performance of his. It's free on Tubi. If you get that app, you can find that app free anywhere. Live at the House of Soul or something like that. But I did that, and then I sat down and just knocked out an album of his beginning to end. And sure enough, those songs I like kind of reinforced those songs I was unfamiliar with and kind of set a palette. It kind of got me prepared to experience these songs to where I appreciated them differently and enjoyed them differently. And it could do vice versa. It could do the same thing. It puts you on a band that you think you really like, and you're like, I don't know about that. Because I've had albums that when I experience it from beginning to end, I'm like, there's a reason why I like that one song. And that's okay. But you have a deeper understanding of it if you at least take the time to experience it that way. There is a band, and I wish I'd have wrote it down, that I just kind of got, found. St. Paul. I don't know. I'll do another music one of these days and recommend this band to you at that point. But I want to do a deep dive on these guys because I found a couple. These are some songs, some horns and things like that, and that's something I get into a lot of times. So I'm going to check them out. But take a band today. Do 2 bands. Take a band you really love with an album you really love, and listen to that album beginning to end in order, and see if that experience doesn't change you. And change maybe how you feel about the band, or at least reinforce your feelings about the band. Then take a song that you really, really like, but you don't know much else from that band. Find that album and listen to it, the album from beginning to end. There's this thing that I always kind of say to my wife, and my wife's kind of stepped back by it, or put off by it. And I have friends. I got a friend named Jeremy Patrick. I don't think he actually listens to this podcast, but I don't know that I'd ever say this in front of him. But I'll often will say I'm not particularly a Aerosmith fan. It's not really my thing. But I remember when I sit and really think about it, listening to Toys in the Attic or Permanent Vacation, even Pump, from beginning to end, from first song to last song, a full experience. Man, those are good albums. They just put out some songs I didn't like, and sometimes I let those affect me. But that's all I got. This is a little short mini cast, right at 20 minutes. Just talking about some music. You guys have a good day.